lie after lie after lie. The stuff, the way they screwed Bernie Sanders out of the nomination, just blatantly cheated against him. Then they just blatantly interfered in the election in 2020.
Dave Smith was a guest on Breaking Points with Krystal Ball to talk about the idea of comedians on these sort of bro podcasts being the new establishment. It's an interesting topic, I think. I agree with some of what Dave Smith has to say with Krystal Ball. Some of it I disagree with. So we're going to take a look at these clips of Dave Smith on Breaking Points with Krystal Ball. I will share my thoughts on this as well. Let's check it out together.
Let me go ahead and move to this Tim Dillon CNN interview, because there are a couple parts here I want to get your reaction to that I think are interesting. So this is a long interview. I watched the whole thing yesterday. It's about an hour long. They posted the whole thing uncut. The interviewer is a woman named Elle Reeves, who became kind of famous for the documentary she did on Charlottesville when she was with Vice News. And so she asked Tim Dillon this question of whether he is part of a new establishment. Let's take a listen to that.
Do you feel like you're part of a new establishment that's being created?
I don't think I'm part of a new establishment. I think it would be pretty difficult to look at these podcasts. I know it's a popular thing right now, especially in certain media circles, to say that after running an incredibly unpopular candidate who was introduced very late in the race because an elderly man who could not be the president, who everyone told was functioning as the president for 4 years, I don't think I'm a new establishment. If you weigh, again, a few comedians with podcasts versus all of the people that supported Kamala Harris, you know, Democrat donors, billionaires, big people. If the idea is that me and a few comedians have more power than multi-billionaires, huge media institutions, a whole political party apparatus, I just don't think most people are going to buy that. I think it seems like a great way to excuse running an unpopular candidate on a platform that American people weren't sold on.
What do you think about that?
Well, full disclosure, I loved him, and he's a friend of mine. But I think Tim is right. I think there's a bit more to it than what he was saying. And I think that, it's almost like, when you use this term, the establishment, it's like, well, what are you really saying?
Yeah, here? It's sort of like woke. It becomes like, it can mean anything to anyone.
So in terms of political power, like, okay, there are big shows that have big audiences. And so, yeah, maybe, we just saw the sitting president of the United States kind of leverage that. It's kind of insane that every politician is not attempting to leverage that. But what Tim is saying about how you have the three-letter agencies, you have the Congress and the Supreme Court and the presidency, and you have huge, gigantic news corporations, and you have Hollywood and academia. There are all these things. So yes, it is ridiculous to call Theo Vaughn the establishment. But the dynamic that what has happened is that the American people have lost all trust in every institution. And so now they are flooding over to the podcast scene, and they have much more trust in those people because they're just real people. Like, however you feel about Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn, they're just real people, and they're just telling you how they feel about something. And sometimes they're spot on about that stuff. The point is that it's not that any of us are the new establishment. It's that the establishment lied through their freaking teeth over and over and over again to the American people, to the point that the American people just went, we don't believe a word you say anymore. And because they were intentionally lying to cover up their unbelievable levels of corruption. And again, you could just rattle these things off, but in the 21st century, what has the establishment handed the American people? Okay, we got 9/11, which they did not protect us from. Then they lied us into war after war after war, each one being a catastrophe, lying us through the entire thing. I mean, 19 years in Afghanistan, they were saying the army we're building up is doing a great job, and they're going to totally keep the Taliban down as soon as we leave. Over and over, we were just going through the stuff with Putin, lie after lie after lie. The stuff, the way they screwed Bernie Sanders out of the nomination, just blatantly cheated against him. Then they just blatantly interfered in the election in 2020, silencing people, the Hunter Biden laptops, killing that story. After a year, of locking the country down, which was kind of proven to be all based on pseudoscience from a virus that they freaking made themselves, and then lied through their teeth about that so they could cover it up. Then they tried to, tell us that this clearly senile man was. How much do you think you can lie? Oh, and by the way, there was a giant ring that is still redacted for national security purposes. Like what?
We'll get to
you
that.
know? I mean,
Yeah.
but like what the hell? Like it doesn't take that much. You don't have to be a super genius to look at this and go, I know what's going on here. You're all a bunch of corrupt liars, and I trust Theo Vaughn and Joe Rogan more than I trust, Anderson Cooper.
Yeah.
So I agree with much of what Dave Smith is saying. So when Dave Smith says they screwed Bernie Sanders over, absolutely. The Democratic Party screwed him. They put their thumb on the scale so that Joe Biden would get the nomination, so that Bernie Sanders wouldn't get it. And the other stuff about lying us into wars and all that stuff, I think Dave Smith is exactly right about that. And he's also right when he says that people don't trust the institutions anymore. Where I would push back on this is where he says Joe Rogan is just a regular person. Joe Rogan was a regular person at one time. He's not Anderson Cooper, where he came from the Vanderbilts and then, got a job eventually on CNN. So he was a regular person at one time, but now he's friends with Elon Musk. So as somebody who's friends with Elon Musk and has a platform for Elon Musk and Donald Trump to go on, is that just a person? He is a media personality just as big, if not bigger, than Anderson Cooper or anybody on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or any of these shows. So I think what Dave Smith, he definitely has a point. And, he's not necessarily saying this here, but is it a good thing that people more and more are not getting their news and their opinions from the mainstream media? I don't know. But when you see people getting their news and their information, say, from Facebook, and these are things that are clearly untrue, but the people are parroting these things that they're seeing as true, just like so much of the stuff that Joe Rogan says on his show is not factual. He's not fact-checking any of the things. And is that not dangerous? I don't know. Let's see more. We're going to get into what Krystal Ball has to say.
Sorry.
I think that's a big piece of it. I think because that term establishment is so up for grabs at this point, that it's easy for Tim Dillon in that moment to make her question look just like silly, like, oh, what, you think I'm more powerful than the CIA? Get out of here. But I also think he doesn't grapple with the way the world has changed in the way you're talking about. And also the fact, like, look, Republicans have the White House, the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court. There's been a huge cultural shift. The podcast sphere that Tim Dillon is part of was, broadly supportive of Donald Trump. The richest people in the world are behind the MAGA movement at this point. They're all lined up behind him at the inauguration. Elon Musk is literally the richest person in the world and probably the second most powerful person, if not the most powerful person in the country. And so, if that grouping, if that ecosystem of power doesn't represent some kind of establishment, then to me, the word is just completely meaningless at this point. And no one's saying like Tim Dillon or you or like, Theo Vaughn or Rogan or whatever, like the pinnacle of the establishment, but part of the ecosystem. Like if you are, broadly in sort of that ecosystem, then I think it is fair to say. And I do think you're right that in part it's because the previous quote unquote establishment had so clearly failed that there's been, a kind of regrouping and an interest in alternative voices, certainly in terms of the media ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I think that there's no question that there's kind of like an upstart wannabe new elite that have through their support behind Donald Trump, they would like to be the ruling elite now, and they're kind of like, hey, the Rockefellers and the Morgans had their turn and we'd like to be the new ruling elite. I don't know that they certainly have a lot of wealth. I don't know that they've acquired that level of power, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Some of them are the same people, Bezos was, and then now
Miriam Adelson is,
even Elon Musk, was previously besties with Obama and now he's all in with Trump. And yes, Miriam Adelson, like the Israel lobby is certainly bipartisan, et cetera. I mean, I guess that is part of it. I was watching your, coverage of, I think you were talking about the crackdown on dissent, et cetera. And you were saying, the new boss feels a lot like the old boss. And, I would say that the tactics deployed by the Trump administration are extraordinary and beyond what we've seen in the past, just the overwhelming leveraging of the state, students being kidnapped off the street for writing op-eds, et cetera. But I mean, that also speaks to the fact that even though there was a revolutionary energy and a rhetorical challenge of the status quo that was represented by the Trump movement, like some of the pieces are too, just, continued upholding of the status quo. And I would say, as evidence of that, another tax cut for the wealthy coming up in the, as a follow on to his tax cuts for the wealthy in the first administration. Again, we have differences on economics, but, the Ukraine war is still going on. We still have saber rattling with Iran. We still have crushing of dissent in, an accelerated way, et cetera.
Yeah, well, and obviously we're only 120 or 130 days into this administration, and the big question that you just touched on is what's going to happen in the Middle East. I would say that as with the term the woke right, it is every single person who they're smearing with that term are all the anti-war people. It's all the people who are non-interventionist. And one of the things, leaving aside kind of the billionaire class who got behind Donald Trump, obviously there were a lot of billionaires behind Kamala Harris as well, but those billionaires that did get behind Donald Trump. What I will say about the comedian podcast sphere, which I do find to be pretty interesting, is that all of them, every last one of them is anti-war.
Now, Dave Smith talking about the different comedians being anti-war. Hey, if we can get, this narrative that is very much mainstream, I think most people in America would classify themselves as anti-war. And compared to what we're getting from corporate media, even the so-called liberal media, which is not anti-war, that's a good thing in my opinion. So I'm with Dave Smith on that. The thing that gets a little bit silly is when we're talking about the establishment and the new establishment in terms of the Trump administration. The Trump administration is still being presented as anti-establishment, but you're talking about this is the second term now for Donald Trump, and he has people like Marco Rubio, as establishment as it gets, in his cabinet. And, you talk about the super rich, the Rockefellers and the Morgans and all that. Donald Trump literally has a Kennedy in his cabinet. Now, he's a black sheep Kennedy, but he's still a Kennedy nonetheless. So is that not an elite and part of the establishment? Up until 5 minutes ago, he was very much part of the establishment. Now the establishment doesn't like him. So to me, it's kind of silly for Dave Smith to label these people. And I know he's just sort of asking questions here, but where you have Joe Rogan, who had Donald Trump on his show and is buddies with Elon Musk. And then you have all these people like Dave Smith and Theo Vaughn that are all in that ecosystem, that sphere of Joe Rogan. Are they anti-establishment? Are they just regular people now at this point? Like Krystal Ball says here, does the term establishment even mean anything anymore at this point? I don't know the answer to that. What do you think? Do you agree with Dave Smith, what he's saying here on Breaking Points with Krystal Ball, or do you agree with Krystal Ball? I mean, they're not exactly disagreeing, the two of them, but Krystal Ball kind of pushed back on Dave Smith about that idea of what the establishment even is anymore. Make sure to give me a comment. Make sure to like and subscribe. This is Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.